Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, I'm John, this is Media TrueNerd, and welcome to my top 12 games of 2016. Yes, 12 games. 12 games, it's my list, so I get to decide how many games go on the Game of the Year list. Because in particular, there are 12 games I really want to draw attention to, and I really didn't want to kind of leave any of them off the list. So, we're doing a top 12, and rather interestingly, this is kind of accidental, but I realised when I looked at my final list, every single game on this list is here for a different reason. There's no, two similar games that are there for the same reason, which made it very, very difficult to rank. And I'll try and explain that as we go along. But yeah, I think it's actually a very interesting list, because there's probably some games you wouldn't expect on it, together with some games possibly not in the position you were expecting. So let's just dive into this, shall we? Number 12. Fear Equation. Fear Equation was a little indie game that came out at the beginning of this year, and it deserves to be on this list because it is almost a perfect example of doing something spectacular with almost nothing. The thing about this game is you are basically driving a train, and when I say you're driving a train, basically what that means is you spend the entire game locked inside the... what's the driver's... it's not a cockpit, whatever the driver's cabin at the front of a big train is. And even within that space, you're not allowed to just walk around freely. You actually just stand and kind of, move by clicking between three locations. So basically, there's 3 spots you can stand in the entire game. You never leave the train, you never do anything outside the train whatsoever. You begin the game on the train, and when the train reaches its destination, that's the end of the game. And the atmosphere in it is incredible. And that's one thing that's really important to me as a gamer for the games that I love. And something that's going to show up on this list quite a lot, which is the games I love are the games that make me feel things. I'm more concerned about the emotions and feelings and sensations I get out of games than I am about, say, technical specifications of any description. And Fear Equation, with almost nothing, from you standing in front of a little screen and watching some little dots move around as you watch a map representing the people on your train who you send off to go and scavenge supplies with a little kind of map view that's incredibly basic. There's so much tension to it. It's an effective action game. It's an effective horror game, which is remarkable given how little there is there. It's just a fantastic little indie game with the focus on little, but it's a huge game for the amount of things that it can make you feel, given how tiny the actual game is when you think about it. Number 11, Panzer Maytals. Now here's one you probably didn't think was necessarily going to get onto the top games of the year. Panzer Maytals is very easy to write off as a joke, but it's not a joke. Panzer Maytals is the perfect example of a game that was made with love. The people that made that game really clearly cared about their World War II military history. And the thing is, a game like Panzer Maytals, where it's a deeply confusing, baffling universe where, the girls you're dating are literally physically tanks, but also literally physically girls, and have turrets despite being physically girls, and literally can fire shells, and the whole thing's so confusing and nonsensical. They could have just done a completely half-assed job and just let it sell moderately well, probably, just on the basis of the surprise and the shock value and the confusion and the novelty. But they didn't. They made a really solid, well-written game. Really interesting, deep characters. Loads of options. Hidden characters you need to play through several times and get on the right options to unlock. So much interesting stuff they had no reason to do, but they went way above and beyond what was required for Panzer Maytals. They wanted to make a genuinely good game when they had no particularly good reason to go beyond going for the novelty factor, and they came up with the best visual novel dating game I've ever played, which is lovely. I genuinely think it's a fantastic game. It was great fun. Number 10, Overwatch. Now, if you told me last year there was going to be a competitive multiplayer shooter on my top 10 of the year, yeah, I would not have believed you. But Overwatch is charming and lovely, and it's just fun to play, because Overwatch isn't really, I don't think it's even fair to call it a competitive shooter, really, because plenty of characters don't use guns, and plenty of characters don't really even do much in the way of murder, and I much prefer playing Overwatch as a support character. I played it a little bit on the channel, but since then I've actually put a fair few more hours into it on the PC version as well, and in fact Overwatch will be returning in some capacity in the new year. Watch this space. But yeah, the more I've played Overwatch, the more I've enjoyed it. I love the visual style, the character design is gorgeous, the visual design in general is absolutely beautiful, the soundtrack is great, it's very addictive, but it doesn't kind of milk you for microtransactions so far as there's any sense whatsoever there's pay to win there at all. So it's just a lovely, fun, charming game. Possibly my favourite online multiplayer shooter of all time, in fact. and probably the most fun I've had with a multiplayer shooter full stop since the days of the N64 and Perfect Dark on the couch with friends. Number 9, Tharsis. Tharsis was a brutally difficult survival strategy game that was not extremely well reviewed because a very large number of well-known video game publications wrote it off, saying way too much of it was about luck and they just got screwed over in a way that wasn't their fault, which proves to me beyond any shadow of a doubt that the entry qualifications for becoming a games journalist are blatantly too low, because anyone who plays Tharsis and thinks it's 100% luck and they're being screwed over and it's not their fault clearly doesn't really understand how any form of medium-term planning or probability works. Tharsis is a very, very clever game. In many ways, it has more in common with extremely complex German and Dutch board games than it does with most strategy video games. You really need to understand the systems and the mechanics in play. If you don't, the game will punish you brutally. But if you understand what's going on in the game, if you bother to learn the rules and the mechanics, it's such a rewarding game because it's so brutally difficult. It's short, so each game is relatively easy to get into and get out of. I've played it a lot since. I played it normally, I played it on hard mode, I played the missions associated with it. It's just a fantastic, lovely little game. Brilliant, brutally difficult game, and a very, very fiendishly hard puzzler, but one that is fair. Absolutely fair, not based on luck. It just requires a little bit more attention span than I think a lot of people were willing to give it when it was originally reviewed. Number 8, Watch Dogs 2. Watch Dogs 2 is much like Watch Dogs 1, or rather just Watch Dogs, I suppose, a game that understands games can just be fun sometimes. Games don't have to always necessarily be big and dramatic and meaningful or whatever. Games can just be fun, and Watch Dogs 2 basically keeps that ethos from a Watch Dogs 1. Because Watch Dogs 1, though it had the grumpiest, frowniest, murderiest man as its protagonist, was actually mostly about just messing around. I never actually finished Watch Dogs campaign, you know, because I had too much fun just going around the city messing around with the various systems. The Watch Dogs universe was always hilarious for that reason. It was great fun to just kind of sit at a street corner with your smartphone out, just slowly causing the world around you to descend into utter terrifying, burning, exploding anarchy as the police rolled up, smashed into each other, traffic accidents piled into traffic accidents, everything caught fire, explosions everywhere, and you're just sitting there on your phone, technically not responsible for any of it as far as the world's concerned. It's just a beautiful, fun game to go driving around, smashing into things, knocking people unconscious, blowing everything up, using all the technology and playing with the city. The city felt so interactive. That was the core of it. The city feels interactive, which is why I prefer the Watch Dogs franchise to the Grand Theft Auto franchise. Because for me, driving around in GTA, I always felt like there wasn't enough I could really do. Long drives out into the country in GTA felt relatively uninteresting to me. Whereas in Watch Dogs 2, there's so much to just kind of do to keep you entertained and play with and interact with while you're just driving around. I personally just prefer it. I think it's a great fun game, and it's just a really nice example of a city and a world map and a game and a series of mechanics that have been designed specifically just to have fun and mess around with. Number 7, Astronaut. Now here's a flipping late arrival to this list. This only got played on the channel like, what was it, about a week ago or something, and I only played it a few days before that. But Astronaut is just fantastic. Astronaut is everything I really want out of a sci-fi game and kind of a big survival-y game or an open world kind of game, which is, it starts off very, very small and it lets you build out the world for yourself. And most importantly, and I don't know why I love this so much, but I love it so much it goes straight on this flipping list. I love the fact that you build out the world and you can see the world as you build it. Just those oxygen tethers. I think this is on this list because of the oxygen tether system, where you lay out the oxygen tethers, because if you're even more than a few feet away from your ship, you start running out of an extremely limited amount of oxygen. So that means you have to lay the oxygen tethers everywhere. But the oxygen tethers glow and provide power. Thus, during the day-night cycle, when it's night, they glow and you can kind of get on top of a mountain and look down and see these glowing strips going across the land. And you can see the impact you've had on the world. It feels like you've built something. It feels like you've had an impact on this universe. While you're building out this base, you can see it. Your base at the center of a spider's web of light that stretches off in every direction. It's just such a perfect little system. It is possible, by the way, I'm being a little bit overly generous putting Astronaut in at number 7, given next to pretty much everything else on this, in fact, next to absolutely everything else on this list, I've put relatively few hours into it. But I think it deserves to be put up a little bit higher, just purely on grounds that this thing is still in pre-alpha stage. The fact that I've enjoyed it as much as I have, and the fact that it's got the artistry it does in pre-alpha, I cannot wait to see what that game is going to become later. Number 6, Dishonored 2. Dishonored 2 is pretty much what you'd really want out of a sequel to Dishonored, because Dishonored was fantastic, and Dishonored 2 doesn't throw any of that out. Dishonored 2 says, you know what, Dishonored 1 was great, let's keep the foundation, let's be true to the aesthetic, to the tone, to the feel of the game, but let's just build on. Let's add some fun new mechanics, like the time shifting thing in Cracking the Slab. Let's add a new power set. Let's just take what we've got and make it just a bit bigger, a bit prettier, a bit more interesting. Let's just build on what we have. And in that regard, it works great. It's a great sequel to a great original. And Dishonored, I consider very high up my list of, well, that would probably be high up my list of games of all time ever. So why isn't Dishonored 2 higher than number 6 of 2016? Because maybe, if anything, despite the fact it's extremely high quality, I docked it slightly for lacking ambition, though it adds some interesting new mechanics, and I definitely say the highlight is the time-shifting power in Cracking the Slab. That shows up in one mission, then never really shows up again. Plenty of the other new stuff feels slightly underutilised. The plot is arguably even less coherent than Dishonored 1. Not that it really matters, to be honest. Dishonored was never about the actual plot as it was told to you. Dishonored was more about the aesthetic and the tone and the feel of the universe, and Dishonored 2 is very, very true to that. Dishonored 2 does, however, have the disadvantage of what I think is a disappointing finale. A great final level overall in terms of map design, and it deserves to be praised for having some absolutely fantastic level design, by the way. Definitely some brilliant levels in there, but the finale, insofar as how it wraps up the plot and the final boss and how all that fits together, to me, next to Dishonored 1, just didn't really cut it. So it was difficult to place Dishonored 2. I could very easily have put it higher or lower on my list, but in the end I feel like it deserves to be about here. But most certainly a very solid and very well-made sequel to a brilliant original. Number 5, Google Earth VR. Now, I know there are questions about whether it should even be on this list, because is it even a game? In fact, me and Matt had a very long Twitter conversation about this just before I actually made this video. Google Earth VR, is it a game? I mean, it's interactive, but it's not really arguably more interactive than like Google Earth Not VR is, and that's not a game, but GeoGuess is a game, and things that aren't a game, and some things that don't have fail conditions or endings are games, but I don't know. You know what? I've decided it's going on here anyway, because for me, the reason Google Earth VR is a fantastic game is because of the way that it makes me feel. And that is the sense of immersion and wonder and awe. Just watch the video of me playing Google Earth VR. It is an incredible experience. It is great fun. Sure, you have to make your own game out of it, kind of, you know, just wandering around cities you do know or don't know and just exploring and having fun. But it's incredible. It's the most incredible experience I've ever had in VR, and one of the most remarkable experiences I've had in gaming, full stop. It is just a wonderful experience. Arguably, had there actually been a game in there, this would have been much higher than number 5. But in its current format, I feel like this is about the right place for it. But just a remarkable experience, even if you're not willing to grant it the title of game. Number 4, Hitman. Well, this has certainly been a turnaround for the books. Hitman has basically engaged in one of the biggest turnarounds in gaming history, from the ashes of Hitman Absolution, which in all fairness had extremely similar core mechanics and movement and so forth to Hitman 2016, which I'll just refer to as Hitman from now on. Yeah, Hitman Absolution was an utter train wreck. Hitman salvaged the few good bits, basically the player movement mechanics, out of Hitman Absolution and turned them into something incredible. It also did something else I wouldn't have expected, which is it took the episodic format and made me love it. I think Hitman, however, is uniquely qualified to be an episodic game because the levels are big and open and there are many solutions you can score chase, and the more you play them over and over and find more interesting ways to do it, the more you learn, the more you hear, you can optimize routes and you find more stories. That's the thing that Hitman got absolutely spot on, the reason I think it's as high as it is, because they understood as a single player experience replaying to uncover more stories and finding all the little stories, and those stories leading into new ways to solve the mission is really what makes that game amazing. Hitman has so much right, so why is it only number 4 on this list? I would say because there are actually a couple of not very good missions, in particular Colorado, also Marrakesh, and in a game where there's only really 6 levels, there being 2 kind of dodgy ones, and one in the form of Bangkok, which I think is okay but not spectacular, where that's not great. That leaves only really 3 really damn solid levels: Hokkaido, Sapienza and Paris. The elusive targets have been great fun as well, which again I wouldn't have expected. Normally when a game stretches itself out and releases content piece by piece for weeks and months after launch, I get bored very, very quickly. That hasn't happened for me in Hitman. I've kept going back to it over and over and over. If I think there's a problem with it, I think it's too easy. I think they have made it too easy to get high scores, too easy to get Silent Assassin. Like, that used to be really challenging. In fact, that's actually been kind of a thing in the whole franchise. Like, go back to Hitman 2 Silent Assassin now and try and get Silent Assassin in all of those missions. There's only a handful of missions where it's really actually doable, and even then it's challenging. Most of them it's basically impossible. Blood Money made Silent Assassin quite a bit easier to achieve. In the new Hitman, yeah, to my mind, it's just a little bit too easy. The game's so keen to show off all these fun ways you can arrange, you know, elaborate accident kills or elaborate setups or traps or funny ways to kill people. It just throws them at you too much. The opportunities make it too easy to assassinate the targets in neat, tidy ways. I wish the game was a little bit harder, and even though Hokkaido was a great ending, a really fun little mission to end on there, very pretty, very interesting, very dense, and I love so much about it. Unfortunately, the limited number of absolutely brilliant levels, and don't get me wrong, Sapienza is the best level there has been in the entire Hitman franchise, no questions asked. There's just not quite enough there that's difficult enough for my liking. It's just a little bit too easy, which is why I think Hitman deserves to be about here on the list. Number 3, Stellaris. Oh, Stellaris. I ummed and ahed so much about where this ought to go. I really wish I could put this higher than it is. Stellaris is wonderful. And going back to what I was saying earlier, for me, games are all about the emotions they make me feel, how immersed I get, how excited and into the universe and its stories I get. And very often that manifests in terms of my videos in how much of an internal narrative do I come up with for a game in a series as I go along. And to my mind, I think my Stellaris series is one of the best series I've ever put together. The Mighty Ducks and the journey they went upon, the neighbours they loved, the neighbours they hated, the wars of liberation and conquest that they fought, and then how it all went at the end. Oh, the arc of that series was just beautiful, and I just love a game where I can make my own internal narrative. And Stellaris, in all fairness, is kind of cheating, because it appeals to the genres and the tone and the ideas that I like in my games. It's sci-fi, but more specifically, it's grand, big, exciting, open sci-fi. It's about a brave, expanding universe all around you, you know, wonder to explore, a golden age of space exploration just beginning. It's grand and epic and optimistic. It's just a beautiful, wonderful, fun, awe-inspiring game to play, and I have so much fun just going around it. And that was when it was still relatively early on. Like, they're releasing loads of free improvements for it constantly, all the time. Like, the version that's coming out 1.5, the Banks version that's coming pretty soon, is introducing some really interesting new, like, cultural and tradition stuff that kind of looks like it works a bit like the culture trees back in Civilization 5. Those are being introduced into Stellaris effectively, which looks really, really exciting. They've released a whole bunch of really interesting mid-game content, because that's probably the weakness of Stellaris in the form when I played it. There wasn't enough mid-game content, and arguably the end game as well, though it's fun and epic and challenging, doesn't quite work as it should either, because the end game challenges, when they show up, they're not traditional factions, so you can't really like form big alliances and do a great big Mass Effect 3 gathering your allies together and going on a big push together. That's very difficult to do as well, so it didn't quite work, but it feels like they've been releasing so much stuff to try and fix that. Like, you know, the Fallen Empires are much more useful and interesting than they used to be. There's massive space dragons. There are space dragons now, so I'm totally going back to Stellaris at some point just for the Fallen Empires warring against each other and the space dragons and the new mid-game content and all that fun stuff. Stellaris is just a wonderful, brilliant game that I just enjoyed playing. It was fun and exciting to play, and I enjoyed making my own stories in that universe. And it was a flawed gem, but it's a flawed gem that they're still polishing up and will continue polishing up for some time to come. So, fantastic little game. In all fairness, like, in a year's time, I might retroactively decide that the state Stellaris is in, it deserves to be higher than number 3 on this list. But it is where it is right now. Number 2, Firewatch. I adore Firewatch. I absolutely love it. Firewatch is a relatively small experiment, but what it wants to do, it does pretty much perfectly. It wants to be gorgeous, and it is stunningly beautiful. It wants to sound good, and it has got a stunning soundtrack and sound design to it. It wants to tell a story, and it tells one of my favourite stories in all of gaming. It is, in some ways, a kind of a conspiracy story, but with a big sting and a twist in the tail, which works beautifully well. And interestingly, what a lot of people said about Firewatch as a criticism was there's not enough interactivity to it. You know, it would work just as well as a film. No, I strongly disagree. The way that the story plays out, the conspiracy and the twist at the end of it, that wouldn't work as a film. The whole point of Firewatch's conspiracy twist is it only works because it's a game and you've been playing along with it. I don't want to spoil it though. If you haven't played this one, please play this one. It's short and it's amazing. As well as being a conspiracy story, it's also in some ways, it's a love story. Now, in many games, a love story is a very, very bad thing, because a love story is something that gets tacked on for no particularly good reason, just because, I don't know, there's a character and at the end they're going to get together with a character of the opposite gender or something, who knows. But in Firewatch, it's probably one of the few instances I've actually seen where I think a love story really adds a lot to a game. It's possibly my favourite romance subplot in the entire history of all of gaming. And in general, when it wanted to be tense, I was nervous, and when it wanted to be beautiful, I was awestruck. It is gorgeous, it sounds amazing, it tells a brilliant story, and I, for one, though a few people criticise the ending, I think the ending is perfect. It's a very unusual ending for a game, but I think the more I think about it, the more I like it. Absolutely fantastic game. A very strong contender for Game of the Year, but it could not quite take it because, number one, Civilization 6. Now, this surprised me. I was surprised to put Civilization 6 at the top of this list, and in the end I needed to choose between this and Stellaris. Why is Stellaris at number 3, but Civilization 6 is number 1? Well, Civilization 6 and Stellaris certainly have a lot in common. They're both gorgeous, albeit in very, very different ways. Civilization 6, for its kind of beautiful, cartoonish, almost cel-shaded aesthetic that I think will age incredibly well, versus Stellaris' grand, big, epic space adventure. Both of them have amazing scores, but personally I would say Stellaris has the better score. In fact, actually, of all the games on this list, I would say Stellaris has the best score. Stellaris bonus points for you, soundtrack of the year as far as I'm concerned. And both Civilization 6 and Stellaris are deeply addictive games that I can play for hours and hours and hours and hours, and when I'm playing them, I just want to keep playing them, and when I stop playing them, I kind of wonder when I get to play them again. But Civilization 6 and Stellaris had one key difference to them, which is what made me realise Civilization 6, though I love both of them, and this really is kind of the year of the grand strategy game. But yes, Stellaris, when I got to the end of my Stellaris series, I felt, you know what? I'm happy. I'm content. I'm done with Stellaris for now. I'm going to leave it be. I'm going to let them add a bit more to it, and then we'll come back to it later and we'll see kind of how it is then. And I'm very excited for what they are going to do to it, because they're adding more and more interesting stuff all the time. Civilization 6, when I finished my Rome playthrough and that series was done, my immediate thought was, I can't wait to get back into this. And I wanted to get straight back into it immediately. Even when that series was done and I felt like that series was done, I wanted to play it just for myself. Again, immediately, straight away. I felt more of a pressing desire to play Civilization 6 immediately again than I did for Stellaris, which is why I think Civilization 6 ended up here. And I just love it. It's wonderful. It just nails that sense of growth as well. Stellaris is wonderful because you start from this one planet and you spread out across the entire galaxy. But Civilization 6 somehow appeals to me even more, which is starting from a few huts that you've just kind of set up next to a river, turning that into a grand empire, and especially Civilization 6 versus Civilization 5, where once the game gets further and further on, thanks to districts and wonders taking up their own tile, now, once you've got a continent that's filled up with people, at this point you can basically urbanize entire countries, islands, continents, because you can look at it and you can realise, okay, between the various districts and the residential areas and all the different things we've built, actually, we've taken what was once nothing but countryside and we've turned it into this massive crowded city pressed up against another country city, which is, well, I was about to say beautiful. It's not really beautiful. It's kind of tragic in some ways. But to me, at least, I like it aesthetically a lot more than Civ 5, because Civ 5, basically everything was centralised in the central city. So even when you were squidged against the borders of someone else, it was just a large amount of mines and farming. But now, yeah, it can really feel like you accidentally kind of build over everything and cities squish into cities, and it really feels like you've gone from a village into towns, into cities, into grand, sprawling urban landscapes squeezed up against your rivals. It's just wonderful. I absolutely adore it, and it's beaten off some stiff competition, and I'm very happy to say that Civilization 6 is my game of the year 2016. So there you are, ladies and gentlemen, those are my top picks for 2016. I'm sure there are some things you agree with and some you disagree with. Do let me know what you think down in the comments. I am more than happy to have a little chat with some of you down there about your thoughts. And hopefully, at the bare minimum, I haven't actually managed to forget anything. I did go through all my videos that I did this year to double check if I'd forgotten anything. Obviously, there may be some games I haven't actually played. This is only games I've actually played this year. There may well be games that were utterly fantastic that I just didn't play enough. Like, you know, possibly on a weaker year, Titanfall 2 might have ended up on this list purely on the grounds that its campaign was fantastic. But for me personally, I just felt like it didn't quite deserve to be here. And there are other little indie games that kind of got squeezed out purely on grounds that this year I'd say we've actually had a really, really good year for AAAs. Between Hitman, Dishonored II, Watch Dogs 2, and depending on how you define AAAs, Stellaris and Civilization 6 as well, we've had some really fantastic major releases. Whereas in some previous years, yeah, it's kind of actually been the indies that have been filling up the spots higher up, just because several of the AAAs kind of let us down a little bit. But no, this year, fantastic year overall. I think 2016 has been a brilliant year for gaming. We've had some absolutely flipping fantastic games. Some great indies at the beginning, some great AAAs at the end. Great year overall. And here's to a 2017 that's just as good. But in the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, I've been John, this has been Many a True Nerd, and this has been my Games of the Year 2016. Thank you very much, and goodbye. Oh, cannibalism. Good. That's a useful thing. Good news, guys. Unless he rolls dreadfully, he should be safe. And that was a pretty dreadful roll. And now the ship doesn't explode. Yay! Not explode. Not explode. Not explode. We're running out of dice again. I wonder if there's any morphine left.